They were the steel behemoths designed to dominate the battlefield, to crush fortifications and enemy morale in equal measure. But for every legendary Sherman, T-34, or Panther, there was a counterpart of catastrophic failure. Machines so flawed, so poorly conceived, that they became death traps for their own crews or laughable failures in the face of the enemy. This is not a story of glorious engineering, but of monumental missteps. This is the story of the 10 worst tanks of World War II. The desperate scramble for armored supremacy began long before the first shots were fired in 1939. Nations haunted by the stalemate of the First World War invested millions in developing the war-winning tank. The theory was sound. Mobility, firepower, and protection were the holy trinity. But in practice, the rush to produce, combined with bizarre design philosophies and crippling industrial limitations, led to some of the most incompetent armored vehicles ever to roll off an assembly line. We will journey from the frozen Eastern Front to the deserts of North Africa, from the forests of France to the islands of the Pacific. We will meet the tanks that were outmatched by infantry, the tanks that broke down before reaching the battlefield, and the tanks whose very design was a death sentence. These machines were not just bad, they were active liabilities, squandering precious resources, and, most tragically, the lives of the men ordered to operate them. Our list begins not with a whimper, but with an absurdly large bang. At number 10, the German Panzerkampfwagen 8 Maus, a 188-ton behemoth, the product of Hitler's obsession with super-heavy tanks. By 1944, as German factories were being pounded to rubble, resources were being poured into this land battleship. Its armor was so thick, it was virtually impervious to Allied guns. But its weight was its doom. It was too heavy for any bridge, and its prototype could barely manage a top speed of 8 miles per hour. It consumed fuel at an astronomical rate and was ultimately scuttled, a symbol of Nazi Germany's misplaced technological arrogance. At number 9, we find the Italian Carro Armato L3/35. More a tankette than a true tank, this 3-ton vehicle was a death trap by the time the war began. Armed only with machine guns and protected by light armor that could be pierced by rifle fire, it was hopelessly obsolete. In North Africa, crews roasted inside its thin steel hull, and they stood no chance against even the lightest of British tanks. It was a weapon from a bygone era, thrown into a modern war. Number 8 takes us to the United States and the peculiar M3 Lee. Rushed into production in 1941 to answer the call for a medium tank, the Lee was a stopgap solution with a critical flaw. Its main 75mm gun was mounted in a limited traverse sponson on the hull, not in a rotating turret. This meant the entire tank had to turn to aim its primary weapon, a massive tactical disadvantage in a fluid tank battle. Crews nicknamed it a damned sewer pipe and a traveling fortress. But its awkward design made it a vulnerable target on the battlefields of 1942. At number 7, the Soviet T-35, a monstrous landship from the 1930s, sporting 5 turrets and stretching over 30 feet long. Paraded through Red Square to showcase Soviet might, it was a propaganda dream and a mechanical nightmare. Its drivetrain was hopelessly complex and fragile. When Operation Barbarossa began in June 1941, most T-35s broke down on the march to the front. Those that engaged the enemy were so large and slow, they were easily picked off by German anti-tank guns. It was a pre-war dinosaur, utterly unsuited for modern combat. And now, we enter the top 5 of failure. At number 5, the Japanese Type 95 Hago. Light, fast, and designed for the war Japan expected to fight in China. It was completely outclassed when it met American M4 Shermans in the Pacific. Its 37mm gun could barely scratch the paint of a Sherman, while the American 75mm round would tear the Hago apart. Its armor was so thin that .50 caliber machine gun fire could penetrate it. For the crew, a direct hit often meant being incinerated in a blazing inferno. Number 4 is the British Churchill TOG, an acronym for the old gang. It was designed by veterans of the First World War who were still fixated on trench warfare. The result was a slow lawn. It was a solution to a problem that no longer existed, a relic of a past war that never saw meaningful combat, a colossal waste of time and steel. At number 3, we have another German failure, the Panzerjäger Tiger P, also known as the Ferdinand. Built on Dr. Porsche's rejected Tiger tank chassis, 90 of these massive tank destroyers were sent to Kursk in 1943. They possessed a devastating 88mm gun and heavy frontal armor. Ferdinand Swarm, Soviet infantry swarming. But they had one fatal omission: no machine gun. When Soviet infantry swarmed them, the Ferdinands were helpless. Ferdinand detail, crewmen firing pistol from hatch. Crews were forced to use pistols through the hatches as enemy soldiers climbed aboard and placed satchel charges. Dozens were lost, not to enemy tanks, but to a simple design oversight. Ferdinand detail, crewmen firing pistol from hatch. Crews were forced to use pistols through the hatches as enemy soldiers climbed aboard and placed satchel charges. Dozens were lost, not to enemy tanks, but to a simple design oversight. And now we arrive at the 2 worst tanks of the entire conflict. The silver medal for catastrophic failure goes to the Italian Fiat M1139. This medium tank was a death trap by design. Its main 37mm gun was, like the American M3 Lee, stuck in a hull mount with very limited traverse. Its secondary armament was a machine gun in a flimsy, rotating turret. This meant the tank had to expose its entire hull to bring its main gun to bear. In North Africa, Australian infantry overran them with ease, and those that faced British cruiser tanks were slaughtered. It was a fundamentally flawed concept that doomed its crews from the start. But one tank stands alone in its sheer, unmitigated awfulness. The tank that was not just a failure on the battlefield, but a rolling monument to incompetence. The winner, or more accurately, the loser, of this infamous title is the Polish 7TP. No, wait, we must correct ourselves. The absolute worst tank of World War II was not Polish, but French. It was the Renault FT, a brilliant design in 1918, but a coffin on tracks in 1940. But even that is not correct. The true champion of failure was a tank so bad it became a symbol of everything wrong with its nation's war effort. It is the Japanese Type 94 TEK. But one tank stands alone in its sheer, unmitigated awfulness. The tank that was not just a failure on the battlefield, but a rolling monument to incompetence. The winner, or more accurately, the loser of this infamous title is the Polish 7TP. No, wait, we must correct ourselves. The absolute worst tank of World War II was not Polish, but French. It was the Renault FT, a brilliant design in 1918, but a coffin on tracks in 1940. But even that is not correct. The true champion of failure was a tank so bad it became a symbol of everything wrong with its nation's war effort. It is the Japanese Type 94 TEK. This tankette was so lightly armored, a mere 6 to 12 millimeters, that heavy machine gun fire could destroy it. Its armament was a single, weak 37 millimeter gun, or a machine gun. It had no radio, cramped conditions, and was mechanically unsound. But the true depth of its failure was revealed not in tank-on-tank combat, where it stood no chance, but in its utter uselessness in any role. It was a reconnaissance vehicle that couldn't see, a support vehicle that couldn't fight, and a death trap for its two-man crew. When faced with the reality of modern war, the Type 94 TEK didn't just become obsolete, it became a liability, a waste of steel and lives that represented Japan's inability to match the industrial and engineering might of the Allies. The resources wasted on the Maus or the TOG could have built thousands of effective anti-tank guns or reliable transport vehicles. The resources wasted on the Maus or the TOG could have built thousands of effective anti-tank guns or reliable transport vehicles. These failures stand as stark monuments to the fact that in the brutal arithmetic of total war, quality and sensible design were just as important as quantity. They teach us that the courage of a soldier can only be amplified by the quality of his equipment, and that when that equipment fails, the consequences are measured in lives, not just lost battles. This was just one of countless untold stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to World War II Records as we continue to bring these forgotten chapters of history back to life.